So the problem now is a problem that really emerged over the course of the last, let's say, 50 years.
Right.
So I should say maybe 60 years, when the so-called Green Revolution happened. There's nothing green about the Green Revolution. It basically, it's an industrialization of agriculture, and that happened in the decade, first and second decade following the end of the Second World War, when a lot of military technological innovation were redeployed to agriculture. I mean, people don't know about this, but a lot of the fertilizers that we use, the pesticides, the herbicides, are actually poisons that were used and invented during the Second World War for biological and chemical warfare. Just now used to kill bugs or microorganisms.
Welcome to Straight Talk, where we cut through the BS and get straight into real conversations with some of the best minds on the planet. I am your host, Af Malhotra. I am blessed to be leading these extraordinary discussions and asking tough questions that then elicit insightful answers, accelerating our awareness of the biggest issues impacting our lives and the future of humanity. Hi, this is Af Malhotra, the host and founder of Straight Talk. What a pleasure it is to come back again. And today I have an incredible guest, and all our guests are incredible, of course, but every single time I do it, I feel it just gets more incredible. And so we have a great author, an intellectual, economist, a thought leader in many, many domains. But the domain we want to touch on today, of course, is something that matters to each one of us who's in the Straight Talker community, which is food and the supply of food, the sustainability of food, and how smart policies and the entire domain of health and the future of our planet, which we've discussed numerous times on the show, needs to be re-examined under the banner of sustainable food. And in fact, that's what the book is: The Economics of Sustainable Food, Smart Policies for Health and the Planet. Let me welcome the great Nicoletta Batini. Thank you for coming onto our show, Nicoletta. What a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Af. It is an honor to be with you at Straight Talk.
Yeah, the honor is all ours. We're going to go right into it, if that's okay, because that's how we do stuff here on Straight Talk. Now, you, of course, have many, many accolades. You can describe in a moment who you are and what you do and why you do it, because, of course, that's a big part of the Straight Talk journey, the personal story. And then we want to move into the book. And of course, the book is just, and I've had some time digesting aspects of the book and watching various interviews. It's a profound piece of work if we do something about it, as in we, all of us together, policymakers, right, leaders, and so on. Otherwise, it would be criminal for you to produce this fantastic piece of insight and data and even recommendations. Because there is a lot that you've touched on in this book that I believe is not, and you say it's for economists, but actually I would argue it's for anyone who frankly cares about food supply and the future of food and sustainability. And of course, the next few generations, because as a parent, I care about how my children are going to survive in this weird and wonderful world, especially the 2050 goal being something that matters to us all. So we're going to talk a lot about that, and we'll just go with the flow, as you know, with Straight Talk. So firstly, what should we know about you, Nicoletta? Who are you? How did this all start? And I'm talking way before the book. Tell us a little bit about your background, your story, because that leads into, I guess, eventually why you wrote the book.
All right. So thanks again. Let me make a tiny disclaimer at the beginning, which, however, is important for the audience. I work at the IMF, so I'd like to make a disclaimer about what I'm going to say next. Not about me, but mostly about other concepts we're going to explore together. The views I'll express in this video cast and podcast are my own and not of the IMF or its board, or the IO, which is the office within the IMF where I work for. Close parenthesis, let me go to myself. So I'm a macroeconomist by background. I have studied economics all my life and worked in economic related agencies all my life. In my career, after PhD at Oxford University in monetary economics, started at the Bank of England, which is the center of monetary economics in the UK. And I had a few years there with also some senior positions advising the committee that sets the interest rates. You'll be familiar with that. And then I moved on to the research department of the International Monetary Fund, where I cared for some of the flagship publications that the IMF puts out, the World Economic Outlook and so forth. I touched a bunch of topics there, and then I left to represent the IMF in Peru for 2 years, where I was the resident representative, following a program that the fund had lent to the country. Coming back to the US, I followed the United States and Canada during the financial crisis, and then moved to work on Europe. So I had several positions. I also took a couple of years off to work for the Italian government as director of the International Economic Office of the Treasury there. And then I came back to the IMF in DC, where I'm currently worked on France, and lately I am a lead evaluator for the IMF Independent Evaluation Office, which is basically an office that kind of assesses the performance of the IMF. It's not an auditor, but it looks at, whether they give good advice, it was even hand and so forth. So now I'm working on a big evaluation of the fund emergency response to the pandemic, for example. Now, as part of my work, I came across multiple times issues related to, public health. I've worked a lot besides monetary policy on fiscal policy, and fiscal policy is often very impacted by health spending.
Right.
And I am originally from Italy. I'm Italian, like 100%, I should say. We put a lot of emphasis just as from birth, I think, on nutrition. So, we pride ourselves with the Mediterranean diet. And I think it's the conjunction of that kind of deep subconscious knowledge and sort of acquired literacy of how to nourish myself, and, just a cultural knowledge that I came with, together with having lived, in northern countries with different, habits in eating, eat maybe more processed food, and then coming to the understanding that these might be behind a lot of the, ailments that people have, and that has an impact on fiscal houses, which of course touches me personally as an economist and as a advisor or policymakers. It all came together at some point for me, especially after I had served as a principal economist on the Nordics and Austria, where I wrote, papers about the connections of fiscal spending with health and public health spending. And these are countries that spend a lot on health as a public provider, and so I really dig down, the roots of what caused those expenditures, and what were the diseases that were more prevalent, and what might be the root cause of those. After all this, following almost an invisible path. I mean, I wasn't driven by any specific interest. I came to read and see documentaries about, the links between food systems and the planet.
Right.
And so for me, it kind of clicked that as economists, we have the levers, and as humans, as people, as communities, we have the levers in our hand to simultaneously fix a number of problems that go from economics to planetary stability. And I wrote a first draft of what I considered, a visionary, working paper, if you wish, called 5 Birds with One Stone. Because I said, if we fix this system, the food system, we can fix, public health, we can fix, the ecology or stabilize planet Earth, we can fix, public finances, we can fix, asset prices and so forth. And this paper then formed the basis of this book. I thought I really need to go deeper on this, because this is there's a lot of material here, and there's a lot of areas that I myself, have to learn about. And so I decided to do an edited contribution volume, which I write myself several chapters, but also others. I team up with other experts, from professors of entomology to people who are clinical nutritionists, people who have agricultural economists, physicians, and so forth, to create, to really cover the ground in this very complex and multifaceted war that stays and sits at the nexus of food systems, the planet, and the economy. So that I hope that gives some idea of my journey.
Yeah, no, it does. There are a few things I just want to pull out from there, because that's very important. So when you talked about your Italian heritage, you raised a very important point, because when you're growing up and the family structure you have and the culture or the subculture you come from, that has a lot to do with your understanding of food, your understanding of whether it's just a means to an end, or actually, in fact, it is a critical source of goodness, nourishment, happiness, even. And it can put you in a great state or in a bad state. Right. Mentally and or physically. And I resonate with that because originally I come from, India. And if you think of the similarities, and I've spent many, many months and a lot of time in Italy as well, different parts of Italy for other things. And I see the similarities, the crossovers in certain cultures where food is like a religion. It's serious stuff. Like, you don't mess around with it. And right the way from home, then into the school, and then into later stages of your life, it is part of how you look at the world. And when that's disrupted or it's destabilized, a tomato is tasting odd, or the recipe feels artificial, it's a fundamental problem, as opposed to, well, let's just buy the jar and get it over and done with. And when I look at the West, and India's the same, by the way, India and the relationship with Ayurveda and food and the entire science of Ayurveda, from using curcumin and pepperin together, as opposed to just curcumin, and the combination of different Ayurvedic herbs, which now is very popular in the West, is what has kept that civilization thriving for many years. But the problem I feel, which I'd like to touch on, which you raised in your book, and I've seen some excellent sort of discourse on it, is this, this concept of, let's look at the West for a moment and look at the West from the point of view of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases, or the emissions that come from it. And so for our straight talkers as well, not everyone is as equipped and educated in food sustainability. So you might have to go back to basics for a moment, but help us understand, firstly, when you say sustainability of food, how would you define that at the highest level? And then I'll come to my second or third level of question. So when you say sustainability of food, what do you mean? What does that mean to all of us?
In essence, there's a definition that is now accepted about this sustainable diet, more than sustainable, which goes hand in hand with a sustainable food system. That is the one that supplies it. And that is basically a diet that is both nutritionally complete and that is producible, for permanently in the future, also for future generation, condition on existing planetary resources. So this is there's a complex geometry problem here, because you want to make sure that people, each one of us and the future generations, even with growing population, will have sufficient and healthy nutrition in their diet. And that diet is not orthogonal to the ability of the planet to sustain the production of those diet in a cumulative sense, both across people and across time in the future. So it sounds difficult, but I think people appreciate that, if some of us is eating in a way that is unsustainable, of course, is taking away from the plate of others, right, in the current times or in the future. So sustainability goes both for human health and for planetary health. It's not just planetary health. It's actually human health too. The way I interpret sustainability.
Right. And what is the problem now? How would you describe, on one end of the spectrum, the most catastrophic aspects of the problem you see today? I mean, why are we here? Why did you write this book?
Right. So the problem now is a problem that really emerged over the course of the last, let's say, 50 years.
Right.
So I should say maybe 60 years, when the so-called Green Revolution happened. There's nothing green about the Green Revolution. It basically, it's an industrialization of agriculture, and that happened in the decade, first and second decade following the end of the Second World War, when a lot of military technological innovation were redeployed to agriculture. I mean, people don't know about this, but a lot of the fertilizers that we use, the pesticides, the herbicides, are actually poisons that were used and invented during Second World War for biological and chemical warfare. Just now used to kill bugs or microorganisms. And we have applied in those 2 decades following the end of the Second World War machinery that we have, again, some of which was redeployed directly from the military. Some was invented specifically, like harvester, mulchers, and all sorts of things that move the crust of the earth in a very powerful way, which impacts, of course, the health of the soil and the sustainability of what is done over and over again.
Right.
In the marine domain, the sonar that had been invented, in the course of between the 2 wars, I think, was redeployed to commercial fishing. So now commercial fishing fleets could find and locate fish anywhere they wanted, including the high seas, through these equipments that were, military. Now, all that basically has led to an intensification of agriculture, and agriculture has become an industry, and animals and plants and everything that is nature became a cog into this big, gray factory that is industrial agriculture. As part of that, because of the energy requirements of this new kind of approach to growing food, a lot of fuel now goes and has gone since into the production of food. So fuel, by which I mean fossil fuels, and that made agriculture additionally more emitting as a sector. And there's an additional factor, which is that thanks to all these techniques, we have been able to raise and the industrialization, not just of plant agriculture or crop agriculture, but also animal agriculture, been able to intensify the way we breed animals. And now we breed them in the billions. And in fact, there are currently on the planet, there are about, like 10 times the number of human beings. So we're talking about 75 billion animals are bred and slaughtered every year for our consumption. And that kind of makes sense because we probably eat, each one of us, 10 chicken or 5 chicken and half a pig. If you think about it, it's not that, it does actually square the count. Now, the intensification of animal agriculture is even worse than just crop agriculture, because animals, of course, eat large quantities of plants, and we need to produce those to feed those animals that then we eat. But the ratio by which we get protein and calories out of animals is much less than what we would get directly if we ate directly those crops. And so what's happening is that we're using the planet in a very inefficient manner, and this diet, which is heavy on animal protein, and we'll talk about it later, is basically destroying the planet at a very accelerated pace. Once you combine it with, population growth and a shift in diets up the food chain so that people want more of those animal protein, especially those population that didn't have access to all these animal proteins before, you have an explosive cocktail. And that's what, creating all the issues that make me very worried and make me think, we as policymakers, I say we, there's sort of a general sense, but policymakers have stacked the cards to favor this system, this industrialized system. And it's, I think it's in their ballpark to change the rules and the economic policies to make sure that we redress food systems to make them sustainable. So, and this is a topic which is underanalyzed, because most people talk about maybe agriculture, maybe food system, maybe diets, but they never talk about the complexity of the relation. And even when they do, and now there are committees, there's been the UN Food System Summits last year, they don't talk much about the economic levers that need to be utilized to put this food system, our food systems, on a sustainable, inclusive, and ethical path. And the book does that, and it looks at both land and seas, at both advanced economies and developing economies, and it looks at the various facets of land use and sea use, which is not the way we use land is for multiple reasons, right? We use it for urban reasons, we use it to grow food, we use it for conservation. And so in the book, we look at also how to triage the use of land and seas such that, we get the maximum out of them for food and for replenishing the biodiversity that we have destroyed through these practices.
I want to touch on that's very, very insightful. And I think you've stitched it all together. And what I'm picking up is you're talking about the holistic nature of these dimensions as opposed to the siloed analysis which happens. And sometimes that analysis is also based on, like you said, policymakers have whatever system that they've endorsed or agenda that they're driving, which has its own sort of ramifications. I just want to touch on one. I'm going down different pathways because the questions are coming to my mind. So when you think about behaviors so the concept you've laid out, I would imagine if someone says, Nicoletta, have you laid a blueprint of some sort out where you're saying these are the things we can do to drive change, then of course you have to a large extent. And welcome to your cat. What's her name? Or his name? Okay.
His name is Yang. It's like
Yang. Okay.
Like in yin and yang.
Oh, nice. Okay, lovely. Well, welcome, Yang. We've had cats and animals before, so more than welcome.
I promised he would show up. He did.
he had the conversation. Is like I've got to get into that discussion straight away. So and animals are a huge part of it, which I'll come to in a second. So when you think about human behavior, which is an important area of study for us as well, what do you believe are some of the reasons why we haven't got our act together? Whether it's the corporations, well, I guess you can answer that more simply. Whether it's the policymakers and even the NGOs, the non-government organizations, and so on. What has inhibited us or stopped us from actually taking the right steps? I know it's complex, but I'd like your opinion and view on it as succinctly as possible. So you give your take on it pretty much straight away.
I think that's a question that comes around a lot, and I think the answer is not much what is stopping us from addressing this properly. It's more what keeps us doing the wrong things. Because to address something, you need to take stock and understand that you're doing the wrong thing, and that requires a lot of things aligned. And I think there's still a tremendous amount of misinformation of what is food for, what is healthy food, and that a lot of that is guided by really corporations and the industry and the agricultural, industrial, to some extent also government nexus, political nexus that prevents I think people from making the right choices. Some of that is information. So just, people think that you're not going to die if you eat a fried Mars bar. And they don't, but other people just don't have the money to buy the food that is healthy. So there's really a financial constraint in accessing a sustainable and healthy diet. And some other people just don't have access to their food physically. There are food deserts, and policies have a lot to do with this. I mean, it's cheaper in many countries to buy a piece of meat, bad quality meat, than it is to buy an apple. You can run all the educational campaigns you want, but then when people come inside the grocery store, I'm gonna put him out now because he's purring a lot. People for long, consumers have three main drivers of consumption in food, where taste, price, and convenience. Now that's changing a bit, and Deloitte has run surveys lately, and they show that people are more inclined to also consider health and welfare of animals and aspects like and the planet. But that needle is shifting very slowly, and it's fomented and supported by, in many cases, wrong policies that subsidize the wrong food and disincentivize the growing, the distribution, and education campaigns about good food. So I think it's a combination of factors, but government has a big stake in it, and it needs to take action.
Yeah, that's fine. And I think I just playing back what you're just saying, the barriers to seismic change or transformation happens to be always, unfortunately, human barriers. You can talk about technology and the role of technology, good or bad, and we talk a lot about the digital world order. But after all, at the end of the day, it's down to motivations and incentives, or lack of incentives. And so, if the system is to be reprogrammed, Nicoletta, just on human behavior side, with all of this amazing work that you've done, how do you, it's a personal question, how do you feel about this? Because, you've written this fantastic piece of literature, and it's pragmatic in many ways. But then again, there's a reality that you could publish as much as you want, and you can educate as much as you want. But these people who are at the helm, many of them aren't willing to change, even at the detriment, as you quite rightly put it, of us going way beyond the 1.5 degree mark. I was watching one of your presentations, and it was, I'm a climate realist. And when I watched that, and I thought, great, you've just reinforced my hypothesis that this is not looking anywhere close to what we think it should be. Even, I think you made a comment, even if we stop all gases today, emissions today, we're still going to end up in a compromised situation. How does it make you feel as an author and a thought leader? And I'm being a little bit sort of sinister about this, and cynical as well, but maybe also thoughtful. Fast forward 10 or 15 years, you'll be at a different stage of your life. Maybe you've written many more books, and who knows, and you're looking back at this book that you wrote. What is there anything you can really do? Is there anything we can do as humanity goes to shake the system up beyond the piece of work that you've done? Because that's the whole point. Otherwise, it's academic. It's a really interesting conversation, but there's no pragmatism.
Yes, I mean, I think that is, the billion-dollar question. What can we do beyond, just exploring, understanding, and finding the right policies, proclaiming them? I think it's, the book is meant to raise consciousness, but also to instruct practitioners. For example, I wrote it for my IMF colleagues, that often are involved into doing surveillance for countries, and I often serve as a consultant in these missions. And I did, for example, for the United States 2021, IMF consulted, Article 4. I did for the Netherlands, Denmark. I consulted for New Zealand. I did a piece on France. And I think the European Union. So first of all, first things first, we need to instruct people what are the pathways to change. And then comes the lobbying. And that's at the political level. Now, the lobbying is complicated because, it's a bit like David and Goliath. You have these global corporations behind. The food systems production is very concentrated. There's also a nexus between the chemical, corporations that basically produce, all the fertilizers, the people that genetically modify food and do genetical biotechnology experimentation on nature. And then, the policymakers, and that's that's a circuit that, of course, it's hard to break. But I think in terms of us, which is the rest of the world, there's a sense in which we can unite in behavior. We can encourage others. We can lead by example. I mean, there are individuals that have changed the course of history, and we can all do our part. We can, we can convince our circle of friends, our families. We can write pieces. We can blog. We can make noise, and use the drums. And consumers do shift production. That's a fact. Now, of course, it has to be a consistent consumer detectable, shift in preferences. We've seen a lot of that going on. I also think that, we will have to wait for, unfortunately, a more critical state of the planet to see real change. And I think that I don't believe in change being, brought from above either, in a very forceful way. I think diet is part of a personal freedom, and I think people should be aware and shown the way, mostly for their health, but also for a million other reasons, but mostly for their health. And what is, I think, nice and unique about the things that we talk about in the book as solutions is that there is almost a divine coincidence between health and in the people and health in the planet. So if you do what's right for you, which of course I guess everybody wants to do, because if they care about themselves, automatically you're actually doing a great favor to the ecosystem in which you exist.
Yeah,
and so
makes sense.
So that what we would need really is I think it's a shift in the way we do medicine, because our health obviously deteriorates over time, and a lot of that deterioration is due to wrong dietary behavior. None of that comes into play when people are forming medical schools. Very little of that comes into the school years, from preschool to higher education. There is no education, nutritional education, and that all boils down when it comes together with financial constraints we discussed, and then the lobbying and pressures of the agricultural political nexus to defeat all good aims. So I think focusing on areas that we never really talk about, like reforming health systems, bringing food education, nutrition education at school, and bringing in businesses such that they are partners in change. I think all that matters. And sometimes you just need, it's like a wildfire. You need to start somewhere, and it's an example of success, and it just picks up. So we all should get active. We could sit down and just be grumpy that we can't change the world, but I worked for this book. I would never have thought I'd write a book about this, and I've talked to so many people. I think it has done something. I mean, I don't know. I think we can all do something, and sometimes it can be much bigger than we even expect it to be. So that's my positive message. Maybe it's not a silver bullet answering a question, but I think we should all work towards change and be realistic. And never be ashamed of talking about these things. There's a lot of meetings like, oh, she's coming again with the propositions about. I never lose an opportunity to raise my hand and say, and what about food systems?
No, you're bang on, and it's beautifully put, actually. And I think for all of our listeners out there, and I think we're straight talkers, we're all mavericks. We do things to try and change the face of humanity and the future that we are building for ourselves. And change does take time. However it happens, unfortunately, it takes time. I wanted to just touch on a couple of things. Maybe it's in your research. Do you see countries or nations or continents out there that have been a little bit more protected or have been on the pathway? You talked earlier about Italy, whether Italy's in the same space it was when you were a little child, or have they also got a little bit corrupted? Are you seeing any pockets of excellence or bright spots out there where you say, well, actually, that's pretty screwed, because they are almost to the point beyond recovery. But these nations can be those activist nations. They could be the change agents because actually they have the stories of success, as you quite rightly put. So tell us a little bit about the globe. Where do you see this being pretty horrible, and where do you see this being a bright spot where you think actually there's hope?
So the Western diet and the baggage of pollution and destruction, both of the human body and the planet, is unfortunately is contaminated great parts of the world. We're talking about 98% of agriculture now follows these conventional methods, these industrial methods. And people in even very remote corners of the Amazons might find, a highly processed food piece in the little kiosk by the road, because the food system, big actors have penetrated this market, often displacing indigenous food that was nutritious, safe, and adapted to the needs of population in
Right.
specific climates.
Right.
Okay, so when I lived in Peru, for example, I ride horses on in the Andes. We would go and cross quinoa plantations, and at that time it was about 14 years ago. Quinoa was not that popular as is now, that is like everywhere you can find even quinoa potato bars. And Neza was using kiwicha, which is a type of a similar family of quinoa, which basically is a pulse to feed its astronauts. So based on this ancient Inca traditions and so forth, but these people have been convinced that quinoa is not good for them and they should eat pasta or white rice, and so it's all kind of like upside down. But there are examples. One big example that the book has examples of countries. So a successful example of every policy that we talk about. And in the realm of agriculture, Bhutan is an example, because they're 100% organic countries, and we know it's the only country in the world that is net negative on emissions.
Right.
And so they remained, very close to their traditions. Elsewhere, there's progress to trying to go back to what was before, and there are countries that have set, for example, targets for agroecological agriculture, organic agriculture, but it's very patchy. And it goes in sort of circles, sometimes 2 steps ahead and 3 backwards, and it's difficult to find entire continents or regions that are kind of safe or immune. I would say that, funnily enough, regions like or countries, for example, China, where more traditional eating has remained for financial reasons also, and income levels, or even African areas has remained more, let's say, backward or away from industrial food, are the ones that are more ahead in the game of controlling emissions. But the temptation is very high, because the marketing and the penetration of high processed food and animal protein food is very strong. There are big economic interests to go for economies of scale. And then there is this other temptation, which has been going on now for decades, which is that of eating exotic or international food that is not produced and does not belong to either the latitude or the longitude where you are at.
Correct.
And that creates extreme additional pollution and destruction because of what it entails in terms of being able to carry, for example, that pineapple fresh from the Côte d'Ivoire to a restaurant table in Quebec. So if you think about it, I mean, this is surreal. When I was a child, I mean, I think we had pineapple maybe for Christmas.
Yeah.
And smoked salmon was like, 1 year, yes, 2 years, no. Now, they just flood it with smoked salmon. We didn't even know where it comes from. And they say, or sustainably farmed. And then if you have a look what that means, I don't know if you saw the documentary,
Yes.
Seaspiracy. Yeah,
That's right.
you know, then you start learning a few facts, and now I walk in a grocery store, I have a hard time buying anything.
Correct.
You know, I'm like, no, I don't want this. No, I know about this. This comes from, oh, this contains that, or it's really everywhere you go, it's a food desert for people that know what's behind, either in terms of human health or planetary health. That means that we need to also as individual foster a different approach to agriculture, which is more solidary with small producer, local producers. And this is like,
Right.
you know, said a million times before, you know, the 0 kilometer. But, you know, there's a truth in that, and that requires a little bit of personal investment in terms of, you know, catering to your, you know, household needs in a different way.
Correct. Yeah.
But it might just sort all your problems, and both from a health and you know, civil society contribution. And in China, there are experiments. There's this young researcher, this woman she's created 1,000, you know, solidary kind of little production units, and she's now opening a network, and she's not making any money out of it. And you know, they interview her and people laugh at her in TV shows, but you know, everybody likes her because the food in China is very it's been found to be very toxic with you know, the heavy use of pesticides and fertilizers. People got sick, and so it's very hard to find edible you know, food that is, you know, considered super safe from a health standpoint. And these initiatives can be reproduced everywhere in the world. I mean, we don't have to, you know, this is not rocket science. We need to go back, not forward in terms of innovation, some of this stuff.
Yeah, you touched on the local food element, and we're coming to the end of the program very soon. It flies by really quickly, but I want to touch on one or two things. So this is an open dialogue, and there's an idea that I want to share with you, which I think has got legs. I recently came back from India. I was there for a delegation, and I've been there many, many times. And I'm throwing this idea at you to reinforce this localized farming concept. And what I've noticed around the world, just an example of India and the UK, which is where I live in London, for example, classic sort of urban living. And as you go to a place like India, whether you go to the main city or you go to tier 2, tier 3 cities, you see a relationship between the person and the home and the produce to be very, very different. It's a much more connected, intimate relationship, to the extent that you still go to what we call in the West farmers markets. There they call it mandis, sabzi vegetable shops. And, you know, it's not glorious. You do have an apple that looks a bit funny. You do have a cucumber that's a little bit bent, as opposed to in the West, we need everything looking the same. You know, the industrialization of optics as well is just absolutely ridiculous. So I visited one of these farms and I was looking at some rural innovation. And I started to realize, I mean, apart from the fact, as you will know, there's some incredible rural innovation going on, even with robotics, with the level of know-how in education on seasonality, on even molecular compounds used around a seed to retain water for longer, which aren't, inflicted with some of the chemicals that we see in sort of industrial farming, all sorts of things going on, because it's an agri-nation. It's almost the center of excellence of agriculture. And what it got me thinking is that in the West, we do a really bad job of it. I live in London. I have no connection apart from this that I'm doing. And none of my colleagues or friends have any connection with an apple apart from buying it from the local supermarket. There's some local farm shops, but of course they're going out of business and they're super expensive now because of the cost of living. So, and we are a classic, I want my strawberries all through the year. I want my mangoes all through the year. I mean, we're absolutely, totally lost. And our perspective on life is distorted. Now, there's a localized farming, which I'm just throwing at you, is this concept, which I believe it should be called allotment at home. Allotment at home. And allotment, as you know, for other people's benefit, is just a piece of land where you can grow some fruits and vegetables in a local city. But if we could empower, like in India, each household, like mine, where I've got a garden, and the government gives me a subsidy, like they did on energy conservation and insulation of my house, where they say, here's £1,000 or $1,000 or euros. For that, I'll also give you education that maybe India has exported to the West, because they know how to do stuff affordable, but excellent. And I upgrade my knowledge over a period of time. So I start to make my own cauliflower in my allotment, which is only 30% of my garden, because I don't want to give away 50% because I want to do my barbecues, whatever it may be, and that can be then not only consumed by me, so it's local farming, I guess, which is what you're talking about. I can sell it, I can barter it, going backwards to your point. I can barter it and I can take the excess to the local farmers market because they always have a short supply. Why aren't things like this being discussed? And if they are, I'd love to know about them, because this is how us in a home, in an urban environment, a main metro city like London or New York or even Milan and various others, we can do something about it. I don't know what the numbers will be extrapolated out. You'll know much better. But are these sorts of things being discussed at policy level in your world? And if so, to what extent?
I have not heard about these very home localized, so localized at the home level initiatives. But of course, urban agriculture is a really great chunk of total global production. I mean, much more than what people think. And there are, parts of the world that rely very strongly on urban agriculture done at home. And actually, in the 50s, in the US, every single family house, including in towns, came with 3 fruit trees. I mean, that was the norm. You had to have, if you were missing one, the house wasn't as worth as a house that had the 3 things.
Interesting.
And now, of course, the lots are used to the full to maximize the volume of the house itself. So I think we're moving, if anything, away from that. But people with COVID and being at home have rediscovered the taste of doing something, with a little cherry tomato plant in the back, or some aubergines, and or a cup of chicken. My neighbor has 4 chicken in the backyard, and that sometimes she asks me to look for after, and I'll become a specialized chicken farmer. But even if the capitalism is based on volumes and low quality, so profit is made in the wedging between the large quantities sold and the lower the quality sold. So we need to go back to a lower volume, higher quality kind of product for food. These are stuff we put, inside our body and we give to our children. And to do that, we need to, I'm giving an example, I restrict myself, to apples and oranges in the winter as much as I can. And you can actually stock up these things. I mean, they last a long period. You can have a couple of crates of apple on your, on your deck, and they go a long time, or in the fridge. So it's also down to us. And, in Kent, you can drive a car from London and surely find some, good apple orchards and, stock up. So it's more of, I think we have become lazy in the way we forage, we take care of our household. And it's easier to go and get a clamshell plastic thing of strawberries to treat ourselves because we deserve it, because, we were stressed, we need to relax. So I think the problem in the food system for a consumer point of view is time. So these days we have no time to cook, no time to shop. And the industry understands that, and they give us what we think we need. And that comes at the expense of our health and the planet. So we need to say, I'm going to do less social media, more going out in the country on the weekend and finding a good farm where I can, get a couple of crates here and there and stock up as people used to do before.
Right.
And I encourage people to, if something doesn't work, you have to change it. You have to change your behavior. And we have to change our behavior. That's for our health. And I think it's the accumulation of our behaviors will make a tremendous difference for future generations and the planet. And that it takes a little step, just one step at a time. Maybe the meatless Monday, that's important. Just, buy a book of other kinds of recipes and, take a step. You don't have to commit. You don't have to do it. You just take the first step. And sometimes it leads you on the right path. I wish we could have these subsidies. There are some allotments here near where I live where people go and, Sometimes they're Chinese immigrants,
Mm.
The second generation or even first generation, that they still love doing what they were doing at home. We've lost the taste for that, because that takes time. It takes, it takes you out of the home, which is your comfort zone. You got to have your hands dirty. Teach it to your children. Give them a task and tell them, let's create some compost. And those are the seeds of the future. We can't. That's our responsibility, and do it across the street. Let's say, let's do a tomato competition. It can't spread out. It's unpredictable what things stick, what don't. I encourage everybody on the program listening in to do one good act for food systems. Starting from New Year.
Yeah, beautiful. You hit the nail on the head, and I think there's so much that you said, the accumulation of different small little things that you do that can make a big change. And I think however we can motivate ourselves, we can make a difference. I think the realism factor is there. There is a dystopian view, if you want. There is a utopian view, if you want. And I do think we have in fact, quite a lot of power as individuals to be able to change that. The good thing, though, Nicoletta, as we close off, is that many of us, like this conversation we're having right now, and these 13,000 people that are part of our group, and this is organic, right? This is non-profit. This is not some marketing agency pushing things out left and right and center. It tells that there is an appetite, it's probably the right word, an appetite for this sort of stuff, where we're listening to people like you who are sharing their knowledge and their wisdom. And now I think it's our responsibility to do that one thing tomorrow morning or first thing in the new year.
Right.
And so, I've started to do that in my life, be more meat free, like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we eat more vegetarian food, whatever, whether it's Indian food or Italian food, some vegetarian food, and that carries through. And then even sausages, meat-free sausages. And if you want that sort of, you want the English breakfast with the fried egg and the sausage, you have a meat-free sausage, and they're pretty tasty these days. And I think it takes about 90 days or so, whatever the number is, to change a habit and to drive a behavior. We saw that during COVID. I think we now need to do that within ourselves. And I think what you're saying is, don't think that you're insignificant. I think what you're saying is, don't think that you're insignificant. In fact, you're very significant if you decide that this is the way your home's going to be run. And so that's very inspiring. And, with that, I'm so grateful that you came on our show. I know you're super busy doing 1,000 different things. It's been terrific talking to you. There's so much more, of course, we need to discuss with you at some point. Before we go, please tell us how this last 60 minutes has been for you. Usually I don't usually know my guests. We meet on the day, it's cold, and I treat it like a comfy sofa. We just don't have a glass of wine or some nice Italian wine or whatever it may be. But how has the last 60 minutes been for you? Some feedback, just your experience. That's very important for us on Straight Talk and for me to do better.
Well, I think it was really, it was fun, and it's refreshing to hear interest in these matters, because, when you do work like this, in the book, you're so involved in it, like you cooked a big dinner, and then, if people continue to talk about it, almost a year later, it is encouraging. Yeah. And there's a lot of gloom, I think, in the world these days. Yeah. Also, what can be achieved, what cannot be achieved. I think I'm a believer in miracles, and I think we can make this miracle together. But I think people, and that's why I curate the information in the book. There's so much information out there about climate. This book, I think it says the way it is. Where are we? What can we do? Why it's important? And the information is curated from a very large set of areas in a way that is digestible, and it promotes action for all of us. So I think talking to you, it brought me back to some of the reasons why I arrived here, and also I think it's encouraging that people like you exist, that we are a community, that we're alive, and that we're not taking failure as an option, and we're moving ahead as a group of committed humans, parents, and citizens, and that made my day. Thank you.
That's amazing. Beautiful. And the feelings are mutual. It was such a great pleasure to have you on the show. We will be knocking on your door again at some point in the future to have another dialogue, maybe next year. Any plans for another book down the line? Have you thought about it yet, or it's something you haven't discussed or thought about in your mind?
So there's there are two projects I'm working on. One is the economics of water, because I think that's a very big, more microeconomic aspects and complex. The other is I'm working on some the relationship between biodiversity and medicinal plants and economics, and how, you know, this can has or could affect, you know, well-being, both from a health and a financial point of view of population. So that's, you know, we know that medicine used to be a different thing before, and we've forgotten. And now with COVID, I think we've learned that maybe we should go back.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, Straight Talk has, as you know, has had so many speakers. So when you are about to embark on that journey, we have covered alternative medicine, you know, whether it's Chinese medicine or it's Ayurveda, and it's linked to wellness. And there are many of our past speakers, in fact, Straight Talkers, who are actually studying this. One person in particular has been studying Tibetan medicine for over 3 years now, and has immersed herself in it, who I will connect you to. So either way, we would love to stay in touch. You're part of our community now. And if you're on WhatsApp and you want to engage with a group of about 90 of us, we're all pretty crazy, you know, mavericks.
I do.
Yeah, I will. I'll take your, after we stop the recording, I will take your number and I'll add you to the group because that's a fantastic platform to just throw your ideas, to get some feedback.